Hi, everybody. Today's Monday, April 13th, 2026, and our dear friend or brother, Professor Marandi, is here with us. Welcome back, Professor.
Thank you, Nima. It's great being with you.
And many of us want to know what has happened in Islamabad, in Istanbul, in Pakistan. I say Istanbul the second time. And what we've learned, Professor Marandi, from the Axis, these are the terms that Axis reported on: ending all uranium enrichment, dismantling all major nuclear enrichment facilities in Iran, and accepting a broader peace, security, and de escalation framework that includes regional allies. They're talking about basically GCC countries, ending funding for proxies, fully open the Strait of Hormuz, cancel the toll system, and the amount of uranium, the amount of Iranian frozen funds that will be released. How much of what was reported in Axis and in the mainstream media in the West was accurate, and how much of what has been said is not, is just making some sort of propaganda?
No, that's not what was said. That was not what happened at the negotiating table. And what the Americans did demand was that Iran give up its nuclear program altogether, and of course the enriched uranium, which the Iranians said our nuclear program is our sovereign right, and we're not a second-rate country. We're not going to give up our sovereignty. And the second was that Trump wanted to partner with Iran to control the Strait of Hormuz. And so he didn't care about regional countries or including them in some sort of security apparatus, or no, that's not what he wanted, a piece of the cake, basically. And the Iranians told him, I mean, they didn't say it this way, but they basically told him this is not the Gulf of Mexico. And so we won't accept that. And actually, what was interesting was that the Americans, they did not seem to have much authority. I mean, Vance didn't seem to have much of authority, even though he was surrounded by Israeli firsters, Witkoff and Kushner, whose only, their only interest is the Israeli regime. But even that wasn't enough. He constantly made phone calls, and apparently he also made a phone call to Netanyahu, which is odd. But the Iranian side made 0 phone calls. Ayatollah Said Mushtaba Khamenei spoke to Dr. Ghalibaf. He gave him the framework for which to negotiate, and he had full authority to do so. He and his partners at the negotiating table, they spoke among themselves, and they spoke with people who were outside the negotiating room, their advisors and so on, because there was a delegation. So they were in contact. They were more than willing to move forward. But in the case of Vance, he constantly had to make phone calls. And ultimately, even though some progress was made during the day, at night, the U.S. suddenly changed course and went in a very different direction. And then we saw that even though talks were scheduled basically for the next day, that Vance just gave a press conference and walked away. And so it's clear that the orders, the marching orders, were coming from somewhere other than Islamabad. Or perhaps Kushner and Witkoff and people outside were giving him marching orders. But because of all the phone calls, definitely there was an outside element too. But and then he made the excuse that Iran is unwilling to relinquish its quest to pursue a nuclear weapon, which of course is nonsense. And I think by now the entire world knows that they're lying. And Joe Kent, in his resignation letter, Trump appointee, highest ranking almost the highest ranking intelligence officer in the United States, said there is no nuclear weapons program, and Iran is not a threat. This is all about Israel and the Zionist lobby. That's basically what Ken said. Now, no one is going to believe this nonsense. But that wasn't the issue. The issue was more or less what I said. There may have been other issues too, but the key issues were the ones I mentioned. He wanted a piece of the cake, perhaps, and it didn't have to be this way in the first place. Iran was not controlling the Strait of Hormuz. It was only because of this devastating, murderous war, which the United States lost, the Israeli regime lost, that Iran decided to take control of it over it alongside Oman, and to seek reparations through it, because these Arab dictatorships, they have blood on their hands, and so the Iranians have the right to do so. And so what Trump is now doing, of course, by imposing this blockade, whether it will work or not, that's debatable. But he is basically telling the entire world that I'm the boss. You cannot buy anything unless I say so. The Chinese, you're not allowed to do, purchase oil. India, you're not allowed to purchase LNG or oil or whatever, or fertilizer. And but also he's telling his friends in the Persian Gulf that, well, you won't be exporting anything or importing anything either.
Professor Marandi, I think when it comes to the seriousness of the Iranian part, Iranian negotiators, you're looking at the combination of different committees within the delegation. It was, you see the economists, you see the people who are familiar with the legal process of negotiations, with everything, the political process of negotiations. Did you see that sort of seriousness on the American part?
No, I don't think that existed. And again, that was made clear by the fact that he constantly, with Vance, was constantly making phone calls. He wasn't calling people outside the room. I mean, Dr. Ghalibaf, the chief negotiator, spoke to the two gentlemen, the foreign minister, and Dr. Bagheri, the deputy for the Supreme National Security Council, and to the people he brought with him on the trip, who were outside of the room whenever he needed to consult with them, or to get information, or get their opinion. They were right outside the door. The problem with Vance was not about going to speak to people outside the door, on the other side of the door. It was that he had to make phone calls, and those phone calls were made to people in the United States and to people in Palestine, in occupied Palestine. So, and also he left, when the plan, he did not tell the Iranians that this was going to happen. So obviously, someone told him that enough. This is enough. We don't want. The show is over or whatever. It's not clear to me what the whole idea was about in any case, because, and of course, nothing that Trump does is clear to anyone. But um, they lost the war. So what did they expect to gain at the negotiating table? Like Iranian capitulation? Iran for 40 days held its ground, and it battered both the Americans. I mean, the combined force of the U.S. superpower and its little ally, which it gives everything to, everything that it needs to attack Iran, and its regional proxies, and all this combined force against Iran and the axis of resistance, it failed. So, did they really expect Iran to capitulate in Islamabad? It doesn't make sense. So, what was the objective from the very beginning? Who knows? Because it's Trump. I've quit trying to decipher Trump a long time ago. And when he speaks, when he puts posts on Truth Social, I really don't look at them usually very carefully anymore, or I don't watch them. Without it, I don't watch them at all because I gain nothing from it. Because he may say something, right now, and then 10 minutes later he'll say something else, or he'll do something. He'll say something today and say the exact opposite tomorrow. So what's the use of me trying to listen to him to figure out what he's all about?
Do you think that the because what we've learned, it seems that JD Vance left Islamabad, but we had Jared Kushner together with Steve Witkoff still in Islamabad. They were somehow hoping that Iran would change its mind and would send a positive sign, and that was some sort of PR for them because they wanted to put pressure on Iran. JD Vance is leaving, but Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner are there to get new offers from the Iranian part. What was that? What was the atmosphere?
As soon as Vance said he's leaving, it was over, and we were just planning how to come back. And because of the Washington Post calling on us to be murdered, and many American pundits also calling for us to be murdered, and also me again by name, being called in online, people calling for me to be murdered. Not the bounty that we had a few weeks ago, but all of us were now, in fact, sorry, excuse me, in fact, on the way to Islamabad. The other people in the delegation were making fun of me, and they were saying, there's a bounty on your head, and we're going to hand you over, and we have debts, and we want to, buy an apartment. Different people would say that. And then on the way back, I said, well, you're not going to get it. You're all in trouble just like me. So, we were joking about it on the way and on the way back. Really, these men and women who were on the plane were very courageous. And their only concern was the Speaker of Parliament. They just didn't want anything bad to happen to him because they wanted him to be able to, play the role that he's played during the last month and a half in leading uh, the resistance, playing his role in the resistance against this aggression. Of course, I mean, even as I think everyone has by now has seen, no, Iran is not dependent, nor the axis of resistance dependent on individuals, and they can murder one person and someone else will take their place, and the resistance will continue. But in any case, people were more concerned about Dr. Ghalibaf than they were concerned about themselves.
What is the real story behind these negotiations? It was all what we've learned, that Iran has somehow sent its 10-point proposal to Pakistan, then to the United States, that Donald Trump himself agreed on those points to negotiate on. And how come, right, hours before Iranian delegation going to Islamabad, they were still bargaining, talking about the attacks on Lebanon, the ceasefire in Lebanon. The other part was the Strait of Hormuz, and the enrichment uranium. What was that? What was the main? Let's put it this way: how did Iran manage the whole situation with the 10-point plan? What was the main problem, in your opinion?
Well, from the very beginning, as you recall, Trump was saying unconditional surrender. And then, uh, because they thought the war was going to end quickly, like in a couple of days. And then they say, well, they're running out of missiles and drones. Like after a few days, they'll run out. They were showing these charts how Iran was no longer firing missiles anymore, or small numbers, and then drones. And then that didn't work. So gradually it evolved, and his position changed until he put out a 15-point plan, Trump. And the Iranians said, that's nonsense. It's just a non starter. And so the Iranians put their plan forward, that 10-point plan that people have seen. And Trump accepted to have this as a framework. And so this clearly indicates that Trump was in trouble. It clearly indicates that things were not going well on the battlefield. So we accepted. And then, of course, Trump backtracked, and they said they threw this in the dustbin or the garbage. And it just shows that, Trump and the people around him in the White House, they're all, you know, they have no credibility, they have no honesty, they have no honor, they have no humanity. They're empty shells. And the people around him are, of course, all yes men. So, and he's props a yes man too. I mean, who knows why he behaves like this? Um, who knows? It's for me, it sounds increasing like he's done really terrible things to little girls or something like that. But who knows? So when they came to the negotiating table, the Americans in Islamabad, the you know during the first few hours, it could have been said that it was generally positive. Arguments, that disagreements, but it was generally positive. But at the end, it suddenly went downhill very fast, and it was clear that they did not have a mandate, or that Vance did not have a mandate. Unlike the Iranians, who had a mandate, even though the Iranians came with great skepticism, the Iranians didn't come expecting an agreement. At least those who I spoke to, and Dr. Ghalibaf, no doubt, and others in the delegation I spoke, none of them had any expectations, and they won the war. They had no reason to uh, to to uh, to appease Trump or the United States. They could have provided him with an off ramp without losing anything, just so that he could find a way out of this and pretend that he won or whatever. But they were not going to give up their rights or give some concession to the United States. They could, create a, I don't know, um, they could they could, muddy the waters, and maybe he could, escape somehow. But that's all they could do. I would guess. But at the end, Vance constantly making phone calls, and then suddenly going, in a different direction, and then afterwards, without uh, telling the Iranians, he just walks away and leaves. It just, it's it's impossible to interpret what is really going on because of Trump. So now we have a blockade. Okay, this is a blockade. You blockaded your own proxies in the Persian Gulf, and then he revises the blockade, which is not going to change anything because Iran is not going to allow them to use their ports if Iran can't use its ports. Who knows? So he's basically punishing the world. He's pushing the world faster and into deeper economic crisis. To what avail? Is he going to change Iranian policy? Definitely not.
These phone calls were to talk with Donald Trump. Basically, one of them you've mentioned was with Netanyahu, which is so strange, as you've mentioned, to call another, the prime minister of Israel to talk about what would be the nature of negotiation, or what would be the policy on the part of the Americans. But how did you find the role of Steve Witkoff together with Jared Kushner? Because there were some reports showing that there was a heating discussions between the prime minister, the foreign minister of Iran, Abbas Araghchi, and Steve Witkoff. What was that? What was that?
No, that's not true. Those were just some of the things that were coming out were just nonsense. About I don't know. I heard that somewhere that it was about to get physical, or that's just nonsense. The Iranians were on the one side, the Americans were on the other. The Chinese, the Pakistanis were at the table. That's basically how it was. And as I said, in some areas progress was made, but then the Americans just decided to make it impossible to continue. And I don't know who they spoke. I was told that one call actually was, at least one call was made to Netanyahu, but I don't know who he called. But the whole point is, I mean, Netanyahu would be extraordinarily strange. It's like, but why would he need to call? I mean, the Iranians didn't need to call anyone, and the boss, his Zionist buddies, the people who handle him, I suppose, were there, sitting to his left and to his right. So why would he still need to make all these phone calls? It's very bizarre.
The outcome, Professor Marandi, for the Iranian negotiators, for the Iranian delegations, and how do they see as time goes by? We know the case of blockade. Right now, Donald Trump is talking about it. It's going to be so difficult if he decides to go in this direction. And what would be the Iranian response? Let's assume he's going to, go with this plan, and which, by the way, as you've mentioned, is going to be difficult to manage that, because it's going to be total war, in my opinion. It's going to be a declaration of war on Iran without declaring that.
Well, it's a declaration of war against like the entire world, because he's basically telling the entire world that no one is allowed to use oil or LNG or fertilizers or petrochemicals from this area. No one is allowed to export to this region. But it's going to be very difficult for Trump. I mean, first of all, enforcing this siege. How is he going to do it? Iran has missiles and missile capabilities, and will the United States like try to take over these ships that come from Iranian ports or going to Iranian ports? I don't know what he'll try to do. But when it comes to doing trade, Iran has 15 neighboring countries. It can trade through Central Asia, through Pakistan, through Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, the Caspian Sea, the Republic of Azerbaijan, Armenia, Turkey, Iraq. I mean, it's not as if Iran is without options. And oil is running out on the high sea. The Russians had a lot of oil in tankers before this war, and they've sold them. They've sold the oil. The Iranians had, I think, around 200 million barrels on the seas, more than anyone else by far, more than the Russians, and others really didn't have much because they were just selling their oil. But I think about half of that's been sold, so 100 million barrels. Iran will continue to sell at a very high price, and it has already made a huge amount of money over the last 45 days, at selling their oil at a much higher price, and increasing their production, and it's been, and also selling their 100 million barrels of their oil on the seas in tankers. So the Iranians have a lot of money to use right now, and of course the tankers, the ships that have been leaving the Persian Gulf, they've been paying. So it's and the Iranians can still sell 100 million barrels on the high seas at a time when there's less and less oil and the prices are going higher and higher. Uh, what can I say? Americans, Trump is not sane. I, as I've said before, I think on your show, people ask me, "What do you think about Trump?" I said, "I just don't think about him, because uh, no matter what he says, it doesn't help me understand him, and I cannot predict him, and I cannot comprehend his logic. So I just stopped doing that."
Yeah. I
And
think
that's why for the Iranians, the only thing that is important is what happens on the ground. The only thing that's important for the Iranians is actions. So if there's going to be, let's say, let's say an agreement with the United States, they'll have to do something that the Iranians can see. Otherwise, Trump's signature or Vance's signature means nothing to the Iranians.
Yeah. What does that mean? It means that, Professor Marandi, before this question, I had something else in my mind about the food security of Iran. We know that Iran produces more than 90% of what it uses, and which is not the case for GCC countries. They are importing everything, literally everything from the Strait of Hormuz. And how is that going to play out in a long run? Because many people don't understand the food production, the advancement of the food production in Iran. They know they produce everything. Just 2 days ago, we had the railroad being hit by Israelis. They built it in 2 days. It doesn't that much. These attacks are not influencing that much Iranian economy. We know that the influence is there, but comparing to what would happen to the region is just not even comparable.
It's also hurting countries that, well, the Israeli regime, which has pushed for this war, is hurting everyone, and including India, who Modi has always been a supporter of the Israeli regime. So while Modi has been sort of trying to, show himself as being very close to Netanyahu, Netanyahu has harmed Modi more than anyone else. And in the case of the siege, because Iran was expecting a siege a month and a half ago, Iran devised land routes to purchase more of its needs. So we were importing, let's say, I think rice from India, and now we've decreased that, and we're purchasing it from Pakistan because we no longer want to rely on sea routes. What does that mean? It means that Trump and Netanyahu have been harming India. They are harming the people of India. Yet the Indian government, even though the Indian government has been clinging to them, so it's not reciprocal, the respect that is shown. And another difference between Iran and these Arab regimes and the family regimes in the Persian Gulf is that, as you rightly point out, Iran produces its own food, for the most part, and its agricultural needs, because Iran has rain, it has snow, the mountain ranges that go east, the mountain range, the Alborz mountain range that goes east and west. It is key to Iranian agriculture. Then you have the Zagros mountain range that goes from north to south to the west of Iran, key to agriculture. In Iran, people think that Iran is a desert. In Iran, people go skiing during the winter, both in the north, but also in the southwest of Iran. And right now, above the city of Tehran, the mountains have a lot of snow because it snows here in the winter and in early spring. Like just yesterday and the day before, when I was in Islamabad, it rained, and on the mountains there was more snow. I noticed that it rained because when I came back, I felt there was more snow in the mountains, and I asked people, and they said yes, that's it rained. So Iran is to a large degree self-sufficient, and it can get what it needs from its land borders. But these Arab family dictatorships, they're deserts, and if there's war, then what will happen? I mean, it's going to get very hot very soon. It's going to become intolerably hot in those countries. And for many people who lived in those countries, except for the foreign slaves and indentured servants and them, the foreigners, meaning the Europeans, and the those who they have nice jobs and well-paid jobs, or who had them, and except for the princes and the wealthy, who I mean, the others have very little, but these people, those who have better lifestyles, it's going to be impossible for them to stay if there's war again in that heat. If the electricity goes out, if the desalination plants are not functioning, then they will all have to leave immediately. It will not be like, I mean, on the Iranian side, they too have electricity and cools, but people, it's their own country, they work, they will manage. But on the other side, they have, those countries will just fall apart. So the closer we get to the hotter season, because in these countries, half the year it's very hot, and half the year it's much better. We're entering that 6 months period where it's going to get very hot and very difficult. And so for the Americans to wage war against Iran in the coming months, it's going to be the end of these regimes. We've discussed this before, but again, before the show, I was saying to you, you're a professor, an engineer. in Brazil, and I teach literature and Orientalism in Iran, and all these American experts and European experts and all these think tankers, they they didn't figure this out. It's very odd.
Yeah. Yesterday, Anthony Blinken, in the interview he had with Fareed Zakaria on CNN, he mentioned that the United States has depleted, you know, a significant portion of its capabilities, its offensive capabilities in this war against Iran. And these are huge concerns. It's when Anthony Blinken comes out and says these things, it means something for the United States. And we know what is the battlefield for Israel. We know how their air defense system is not working properly anymore because they don't have communication with the radars. They don't have interceptors sufficient enough to defend themselves. And it seems that was the main reason that the United States has decided to change the course, to make some sort of negotiation talks, then going after blockade. And what is your take on that?
Well, I think that's correct. But of course, people should keep in mind that it's not as if during the ceasefire Iran is just sitting there and its armed forces are on vacation and the country's generals are, on skiing in the slopes of above Tehran. No, that's not what's going on. They too are preparing themselves 24 hours a day for the next round, which will, of course, as I said, be very difficult for these regimes in the Persian Gulf. It will end it will bring about an end to their existence, in my opinion. But but it is, I think, uh, sort of like what we saw during the 12-Day War. Many people after the war, I mean, there are a couple of things that I have to myths that I would like to deal with here. One is after the 12-Day War, when Iran accepted the ceasefire, people were saying, why did they accept? That this was crazy mistake. Iran also knew that if this war continued, even though it had the upper hand, the Americans would enter the war. And so the Iranians saw during the war their shortcomings, and they wanted to buy time to prepare themselves. And look at the astounding difference. This war, even though the firepower was much greater, because the Israeli regime on its own, it's not a force that can, continue fighting with Iran. It would be defeated. The U.S. brought all of its assets into its offensive assets into the region and assaulted the country. Yet the amount of damage that they did to Iran's military was less than during the 12-Day War. So a lot of work was done during those, after the 12-Day War. And if Iran hadn't done that and the United States had entered the fight, it would have been much more costly for Iran. So Iran is preparing itself without a doubt for the next phase. But also we have to keep in mind that the United States is also showing that its priority is Israel and not anything else. Zionists don't care about the United States. So the United States capabilities in East Asia are being depleted. We saw what they did in South Korea, and we now see the opposition leader of Taiwan in China. I haven't been following that news because I've been very busy, but I do find it interesting that at this moment in time, that she would go to China and make the statements that she did. I think it's revealing about the nature of the shifting balance of power. So the United States is sacrificing all of its um, hegemonic ambitions across the globe for the sake of this puny genocidal. I mean, right now, as we speak, they're carrying out another genocide in Lebanon, and Western media doesn't want us to see it. They draw attention away from it. They call all these villages and the slaughter of all these industries, they call them Hezbollah strongholds or set Hezbollah targets, just like what they did in Gaza. It just shows that Western media has zero credibility and that their journalists have zero humanity. I mean, when the Washington Post calls on the negotiators to be murdered, and on our way back, we were prepared psychologically and spiritually to be killed on the plane. We were prepared for that. because we knew that that was a strong possibility. And But in any case, the point is that when you're dealing with a regime where its media itself is calling for murder and assassination and supporting genocide and forcing people to turn away from the genocide or lying about it to justify it, you're dealing with a really sinister force. Everything, all U.S. credibility, its image has been destroyed. Its military capabilities are being depleted, and its empire is collapsing at a much quicker pace than ever before. I think this war with Iran is a turning point, probably more important for the Western Empire than anything since the Second World War, including Vietnam. But all of it for the sake of Zionism, for the sake of ethno supremacism, for the sake of a master race, a chosen people, and where everyone else is Amalek and subhuman, beyond the imagination of any sane person. Any sane person would have very great difficulty comprehending such a state of affairs. But here we are.
Yeah. Professor Marandi, we've learned today that Iran would respond to this blockade on the Iranian ports. What would be the scale of response on the part of Iran? Is going to be the attack, or some sort of attack, or some sort of warning to the tankers who are coming to these ports with GCC countries, or it's going to be the attack on the ports?
I don't know what's going to happen, but obviously, when the Iranians say that it includes the Gulf of Oman, that means that the UAE um, uh, port outside of the Strait of Hormuz, um, Fujairah, that would be included. That's my assumption, although I haven't asked. And then, of course, within the Persian Gulf, Iran already has control, so the ports really don't mean anything because the ships can't come and go out of the Strait of Hormuz under these circumstances. If Iranian ships leave the Strait of Hormuz and the Americans try to pursue them, what would Iran do? I think Iran would warn the Americans, and they would ultimately fire missiles at them. And the range for Iranian missiles is quite high. What would then happen? I don't know. I mean, would the Americans wait to have the Iranian ships leave range? But that would mean that their blockade would have to be very massive and very expansive and very very costly. So I don't know exactly what the Americans are going to do, but if they do try to board Iranian ships or anything like that, I mean, we saw what happened during the negotiations. The Americans brought two ships into the Persian Gulf. The Iranians published footage of this. The Iranians warned them, sent drones, and turned around and left. So the Iranians mean business. I think the Americans know that. Americans, if there are threats made to Iran, to Iran, and the Iranians turn on their missile systems and their drone systems, American ships are going to have to go back 1,000 kilometers or so, if not more. And Iran has said they have not revealed all of their capabilities. Most of Iran's, you know, most advanced capabilities uh, have yet to be inaugurated or have yet to be shown to us on the battlefield.
Yeah, I think the combination of the Strait of Hormuz together with Bab el Mandab would somehow neuter the Suez Canal as well. And eh, do you see anytime soon the Bab el Mandab coming to the, to the equation on the part of Iranians? And how about the Saudi Arabia exporting their oil using their pipeline? Is that going to come to the calculation? Is that going to be part of the operation?
Well, the Saudi exports, I think they're roughly 3.5 to 4 million barrels a day, and that's about it from the Red Sea, and that is vulnerable, of course, to Ansar Allah's capabilities, and it could be ended, and trade in the Red Sea can be ended as well, especially since the United States is so much focused on Iran. But Iran doesn't wish to escalate. Iran did not start the war unless you watch Western media. Everyone would know that. But if you watch Western media, you think Iran started the war. and Iran did not escalate. It was the other side that escalated and forced Iran on every occasion to reciprocate. So the capabilities in Iraq and the capabilities in Yemen and the capabilities of Iran uh, have not reached. I mean, they still have not been used anywhere near to their maximum, uh, the maximum capability that exists.
Those people who are criticizing Iran because of these negotiations, they're telling that they knew that these negotiations are not going to get anywhere. What would be your response to those people who don't see any sort of viable choice on the part of Iranians to negotiate with the United States? What is the diplomacy? How does Iran see the diplomacy toward the United States?
Well, first of all, the myth, the myth of Iran being naive, I should have dealt with earlier. The myth of Iran being naive, that was always nonsense. Iran was not fooled before the 12-day war. Iran knew that there was going to be an attack, and I may have told this. We may have discussed this once off air. I mean, maybe when you were in Tehran. But even I knew that the Americans were about to attack, even though I'm not in any government position. But I knew from outside of Iran, from information that people gave me from outside Iran, that an attack was imminent before the 12-day war. And I told people, and they already knew. But Iran was negotiating back then, and the Americans were constantly, by the way, changing the goalposts, moving the goalposts, because Iran wanted the international community and the Iranian people and American people to know that Iran was doing what it could to prevent war. Because if Iran had not negotiated, then people would have said, well, if only you had negotiated, maybe we could have averted a war. So Iran did not want and the West having all that media capability. They would have run with that. The Western media is not, honest, or they don't have any credibility, or they don't have any, moral compass to write the right thing. It doesn't matter even if they're opponents of Trump or not. They're hostile to anyone that opposes the empire. The same is true with this war. Before it started, we were negotiating, but we knew there was going to be an attack. But the fact is that the Iranians want to make sure that everyone recognizes that we are trying. In this case, Dr. Ghalibaf, the Speaker of Parliament, he risked his life. He knew that he is a key target for the Trump regime and the Netanyahu regime, but he went there to make it known to people across the world that Iran is going to go the extra mile or the extra kilometer to prevent escalation. And what happened? Trump, again, being the madman that he is, the psychopath that he is, showed to the world that he is unreasonable. Netanyahu, being the mass murderer and genocidal maniac, as we see in Lebanon right now, despite the fact that the West is trying to hide it, but people across the world see that he's slaughtering women and children. He is being seen as the force for escalation, and the Iranians are being seen as the force that does not want escalation. Is Iran seen as weak? No, I think the last 40 days and the 12-day war before that, but the last 40 days in particular have shown the world that Iran is definitely not weak, nor is the axis of resistance.
What would you say? I try to respond my own way, but what would you say to those people who are arguing that there is some sort of difference within the administration, within the Iranian decision makers? And we have two. What is your understanding of that? How do you explain that for us?
I would say that the Western media, again, doesn't matter if they're opponents of Trump or supportive of Trump's. The empire is the empire. Internal differences among the Epstein class, it's understandable. Among their employees, it's all, it exists. But factional differences are there. But when it comes to the empire, they're all the same. Why would they promote such a narrative? Because they want to show Iran as fragmented and weak and divided. Iran has emerged out of this 40-day war, fighting a combined force of the West, and of course Europe playing its own role maximum pressure sanctions, Korea, Japan. They may not send troops from Australia, but they're certainly assisting the United States with propaganda, with sanctions, and New Zealand and so on. And these all the regional proxies, even Turkey under Erdogan, the Republic of Azerbaijan, all this huge front against Iran failed, and the axis of resistance. They failed. They lost. So the best way forward is to to try to show this very powerful force that has become much more powerful after the war as fragmented and weak, both to create divide inside Iran, but also to present Iran as weak outside of Iran. It's not going to work. The Iranian people are very confident in their position, and they know that the road ahead is going to be tough, but they know that they're on the side of truth. And they are being punished simply because they want to be independent and simply because they're saying no to genocide, whether in Gaza, whether in Lebanon, or whether in Cuba. Doesn't matter. And that's why we're so evil, and that's why we're demonized.
Yeah. Before wrapping up, Professor Marandi, we've seen Europe behaving even with this blockade, the United Kingdom, and together with Australia, they said they're not going to be part of the blockade. They're not going to do anything militarily to help Donald Trump. But we have Spain reopening its embassy in Iran. How does Iran evaluate the policies of the European countries?
Trump's ship is slowly sinking. It's not that Europe. I mean, I don't want to make a universal comment on Europe. It's not that anyone in the West is any better than Trump. I mean, the French and the Germans and the British don't have anything to send to fight Iran. What can they contribute that would make any real difference? And Trump has humiliated them so many times recently. But in any case, they know that they cannot make things worse for Iran. They'll only make things worse for themselves because their people who are already very angry with a host of issues will become more angry. And none of these leaders have any credibility and any real legitimacy popular wise among their people. So, but it shows that Trump's ship is sinking. It shows that he does not carry, he does not have, he is not the heavyweight that he thinks he is. He's being ignored, and that makes him only more angry. That's why he insults people. He insults the French president, saying his wife beat him up, and this is who he is. But it's not going well for him at all.
Yeah, he supported Orban in Hungary, and Orban lost the election. I think
Yes,
that means a lot.
right. That's right. And the Taiwanese opposition leader going to China. Multiple things are happening in Europe and elections in Germany. None of them are going his way right now. And of course, nothing seems to be going his way.
Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Professor Marandi.
Thank
Great
you,
pleasure
Nima.
as always.
Great pleasure. Pleasure is mine.